You're on 94.9 this morning, and it was starting again. It just went round twice. It is 10 minutes past 8. We have Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International. So, good morning, Dr. John.
Yeah, good morning, Mick. How are you today?
Oh, great. It's great to have you on the line again, Dr. John. And, of course, you're from Creation Ministries International, and you guys have your own website, creation.com, and we answer questions that people send to us on our text line, which is 0401 949 949. Now, your expertise, Dr. John, is in, talking about anything sort of evolution, creation, and you've talked to us a lot in the past about things like dinosaurs and aliens, and it's always exciting, Dr. John. I'm always excited about what you're going to be speaking about this week.
Yeah, well, look, I'm actually going to get onto a very interesting article that was on the Creation Ministries website, because people who are familiar with the website would know that every day there's a new article published. Some of them are reprints from old articles in the Creation magazine, but they're very, very interesting, and they're usually topical because, they talk about things that might be happening in the news anyway, that Creation Ministries has published something on in the past. But look, this article I read was about fish. And look, it's another example of how the general public can be duped by scientists into believing in evolution just because there's change. And change isn't evolution, but that's what the scientists always call it. And I think partly that's because they're more likely to get their research papers published if they use a few buzzwords like evolution, because that's very popular. So if you want to talk about evolution, you've got to use, or anything even remotely related, you've got to use the word, and then you're more likely to get the paper published. But look, there aren't actually any evidences of evolution ever being observed to happen. Now, that sounds like a pretty astonishing statement, doesn't it? No examples of evidences of it being observed to happen. And I mean, I've made that to a couple of my unbelieving friends in the past, and they generally come back and they say, "Oh, what's wrong with you? There's millions of examples." But when you then say, "Well, how about you name just one?" they're stumped. They can't do it. And I think you've had the same experience with a few of your friends. Where they say, "Oh, yeah, there's thousands of examples," but when you try and nail them down and get them to name one, then they can't do it. And that's because it isn't possible to produce what we might call upward genetic progression. That is, an increase in genetic capability. You cannot do it by natural means. Now, it can be done by humanity. I mean, humans can take things like bacteria and viruses and play with them and produce some changes, but that means there's been interference with an intelligent source, like humanity. But they can only be originally created by an intelligent source, and that intelligent source was God. And the reason for the fact that there's no upward increase in genetics, naturally speaking, is because of the second law of thermodynamics. Everything tends to go in a downward direction. And that's exactly what we observe with mutational changes. Now, it doesn't mean that even though the mutational changes are downwards, it doesn't mean that they can't confer a benefit. And we saw a perfect example a couple of weeks ago with those tuskless female elephants. You remember we were talking about the female elephants that so there seem to be plenty more now that don't have any tusks. Now, failure to develop tusks is actually harmful to the elephants because they can't dig in the ground and they can't strip bark off the trees. But what it does do, it protects them from poachers because they're not worth shooting. So more of them survive to reproduce, and they also produce more female offsprings because one of the mutations is on their X chromosomes, and half of their female calves are going to be carrying it. So there's more tuskless female elephants coming into observation. Mm-hmm. But it's not evolution, right? It's because man is doing it by poaching.
Yes.
But the point is, they're still elephants. They're partially disabled elephants, and that disability is only going to increase in time. But the progress could be arrested if poaching could be immediately stopped, and the trend could go back the other way. But that's not likely to happen because of the intervention of man. And the reason why man intervenes is because of his greed for money. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on in the program too.
That sounds good. You're on 94.9 at 16 minutes past 8. We've got Pat. You're on 94.9 this morning. And I can hear an echo, Dr. John. You've got something turned on. We've been talking this morning a little bit about de-evolution. Yes, that is pretty much the opposite of evolution. In fact, if you Google it, it says de-evolution is backward evolution, the notion that species can revert to supposedly more primitive forms over time. And I mean, if you really look at what's going on Earth, even humans, the Bible talks about how people used to live for so long way back when, and now, well, we're closer to 70 or 80 years. So certainly happened in people, and we've seen it happen in many other species, and no one's actually proven evolution. Ask somebody where evolution has really happened and look and see whether it's actually de-evolution, just because there's change or not. And one thing I want to throw in there, Dr. John, by the way, before we go back to de-evolution, I saw a headline last week, and they were talking about, well, it actually said ancient Earth may have been ravaged by gigantic rainstorms.
Isn't that an amazing thing, Mick? And we know there was at least one.
Yep.
It lasted for 40 days and 40 nights.
Yeah, but the scientists have just figured this one out, Dr. John.
Yeah, well, that was a pretty gigantic rainstorm.
Yes.
It was a bit more than that, but isn't it amazing how they always come up with these things, and they talk about things being biblical in extent because they know that the Bible talks about such things.
Yes.
So there you go. That's a good one.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but de-evolution.
I'm as people know, I've been talking for a couple of weeks about these tuskless elephants, and the rise in their frequency has been produced by poachers. And I want to use that example to explain something about an issue that affects a lot of us, and that is the rise of the so-called Superbug Bacteria. The dreadful infections that are practically untreatable with antibiotics. Now, there's a few means by which that can come about, but the main one really is very similar to the elephants. Now, remember, we've said that the change in frequency of the tuskless elephants has been produced by poachers. Well, let's take as an example the bacterium that we've all heard about, the so-called golden staph.
Yep.
Right? Now, golden staph isn't such a dreadful enemy. We've all got it on our skin.
Ooh.
It's only becomes a problem if you get wound infections or things like that with it. Well, if we go back to the beginning, let's say before the era of penicillin, and penicillin was discovered back in the 1930s. Now, at that time, the majority of the golden staph bacteria were normal. And all bacteria like golden staph produce a little bit of an enzyme called penicillinase, which enables them to combat molds and things like that they encounter in nature. But some of the golden staph back in the early days produced a lot more of that enzyme, but very, very few of them did that. because they weren't as robust as the standard golden staph, you see. And that meant that they were devoting a lot of their resources into producing this enzyme, which they produced in greater quantities. Yep. But then along comes penicillin, you know, this discovery that's very, very famous, and everybody knows how it happened, about the mold floating in and whatever. But along comes penicillin, and of course it starts to eliminate the most robust of the bacteria. But that means that the ones left behind are the ones that are not quite so robust. Now, it's exactly the same as the elephant poachers. You know, you can regard the penicillin as being equivalent to an elephant poacher, right? It knocks off the ones that don't have the penicillin A's and leaves the ones that do. So that means that they then replace over time the others in frequency. They're not as robust, but they're a little bit harder to treat. So anyway, eventually we find that the golden staph is not treatable with, say, penicillin. So we develop another antibiotic. And that comes along, and there are maybe a few bacteria that happen to be resistant to the new antibiotic. So it acts like the elephant poacher, and it then starts to knock off the next level of robustness of the of the bacteria, and we end up with even weaker ones. But they seem to be tougher and stronger because they're not treatable with the antibiotics. So, but they're still golden staph, and we are calling them superbugs, not because they're more robust, they're actually weaker. And if we weren't using so many antibiotics, they wouldn't be around. So they're not more prone to cause infection, it's just that when they do, they're much harder to treat.
Yes. Yes, well, we'll be back with Dr. John shortly. It's 8:26. We've got the news, weather and traffic coming up shortly. Creation Ministries International. He's been talking to us about, we've talked about a little bit of last week's news and also questions that people send in. Please send your questions through to 0401 949 949. We've talked a bit about de-evolution this morning. And what's coming next, Dr. John?
Yes, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about fish and chips, Mick, which is obviously an interesting topic for everybody.
I'm getting hungry already.
Can't produce the smell, unfortunately, Mick. That would get you hungrier still.
Yes.
But look, what we've just been describing with the elephants and the superbugs is definitely scientific, but it's not evolution. And what I'm going to talk about with the fish and chips is also scientific, and it's along the same lines, but it's not evolution. And there was an article on the Creation Ministries website about the size of fish, the cod, that is the most popular fish and chips in England anyway. In fact, the Poms love their fish and chips, and maybe that's where we started to develop the popularity of it in Australia from. But the most popular fish in England is cod, and it's caught up there in the North Sea, so up in the North Atlantic, and it's similar on the other side of the Atlantic near Canada and Newfoundland. You know, so they have been fishing cod as well. But over the decades since the Second World War, the average size of the fish that's been caught has declined by about 50%. I mean, it's a very, very large decline. Now, it gets called evolution, but it really doesn't have anything to do with evolution. The explanation is scientific, but it's not evolution. And again, just like with the elephants and just like with the superbug bacteria, it's man's intervention which is the cause. And it really only goes to show that the Bible science is actually better than the world science. But just like every animal species and in people, our size is determined by our genetics. And genetically, some of the fish are larger and others are smaller. And but governments have worked on the assumption that the decline in size is due to overfishing. So they've often specified size limits for the fish. So the fishermen are supposed to put the smaller fish back and only keep the larger fish. But there's a bit of a paradox here, because the larger fish usually produce a lot more eggs than the smaller fish. So in one sense, it would be better to keep the smaller fish and throw back the larger. Now, can you imagine telling fishermen that they ought to keep the little ones and throw back the big ones?
Yes.
I mean, every fishy story is boasting about the size of the fish that you caught, you know, and the one that got away is always the biggest one, much bigger than the ones that you actually landed.
What if we just kept all the middle-sized ones?
Well, I don't know. I think the smaller ones would be better because they don't produce so many eggs. But look, the commercial fishermen have been using nets with a fairly large mesh. And the idea of the large mesh is to enable the smaller fish to get out, and so they only catch the larger ones. But what that means is that the genetic information for large size gets lost over time. So that's what we see. You see, we see that now the fish are generally 50% smaller than what they were. So it's a perfectly scientific explanation, but it's due to man's intervention, and it doesn't have anything to do with evolution. And in places like the Grand Banks off Canada, the fish stocks were very badly depleted, and even when fishing was banned, they didn't really recover. That's because the larger fish produce more eggs. So we've not only got a reduction in fish size, we've got a reduction in fish numbers, and it really is due to man's intervention. It's got nothing to do with evolution. And only God can create the genetics, and once they're gone, they don't come back.
Wow. Another case of de-evolution, and that is losing some of those genes rather than actually gaining new ones, which has never, ever been proven. Really interesting, isn't it? It is 17 minutes to 9. We'll be back with Dr. John shortly. If you have any questions, please send them to our text line 0401 9 minutes to 9, and it's time for Rima to move. Yeah, we got to move it. We're outgrowing our space, and we have a November appeal. You can help by giving to our November appeal. Simply call 4367 4042 after 9:30 or go to rima.cc. Now, yes, it is 12 minutes to 9. We have Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International. He's been talking to us this morning about de-evolution, you know, things like elephants losing their tusks and fish in the sea that just aren't growing as big anymore. And what is the real problem, Dr. John?
Well, look, all of these problems, Mick, are caused by human intervention. And if it wasn't for humanity, the world wouldn't be experiencing so many issues. And, of course, world leaders meet and they have all of these conferences, like they've got the climate change conference going on there in Glasgow. But the interesting thing to me is that not only are the world leaders attending these conferences, like the one in Glasgow, but so are all the multi-billionaires, like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and all of these other people. Now, what does Bill Gates know about climate change that you don't, Mick? Do you think he knows any more? No, I don't think he does. But why is he there then? And I think the answer really is that out of these conferences seems to come an opportunity to make money. And therein lies the problem. the world leaders don't really address the major issue, and that's human greed and the lust for money. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, our Bible tells us, doesn't it, that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Mm-hmm. And we might call it greed or the love of money, but when you boil it all down, it's actually that three-letter word called sin. Mm. And really, the problem is very deep. And the Bible tells us where it all came from. It came from the temptation in the Garden of Eden for Adam and Eve, and it's come from the devil himself. And he's actually behind all of these problems in humanity. The devil uses money and the lust for money and power to manipulate the whole world. And I think we're seeing a lot of that going on at the moment. Mm-hmm. But the Bible also gives us the answer, that man doesn't seem to want to know what the answer is. God has dealt with the sin problem by the sacrifice of Jesus, and that enables him to forgive and accept all of those people who want to accept his offer of forgiveness. And that's transforming, and it really is the only way that an individual can be transformed, and that is from within and being reborn of the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And people can champion all sorts of causes like climate change, but unless the root problem is addressed, nothing is ever going to happen. Mm. And the same goes with the world's pollution. You know, isn't it wonderful? I think it's fantastic that a lot of cleanups are happening around the world. But until the heart of man is changed by the Holy Spirit, it's just going to be like putting Band-Aids on a cancerous sore. Mm. It covers it up, but it doesn't deal with the underlying problem. Yes. And really, the solution to all of the issues is that we've just got to get back to Bible believing, look at what the real cause is, look at our own hearts to see that when we look in the mirror, we're looking at the problem, the heart of man. Mm. And it needs transformation by the Holy Spirit, the forgiveness that only comes from Jesus, and then the acceptance by God and being brought into his family. And really, therein lies the answer. If we all turn back to the Lord, accepted his forgiveness, changed our hearts, then these problems of mankind would disappear. But they're not going to go any other way.
Mm. Well, we've got to look forward to that on the new earth, Dr. John.
Oh, the new earth is going to be a wonderful earth, Mick. We're going to have new bodies and we're going to have new hearts. And sin is not going to get a leg in. And
probably bigger fish. But then we're not going to eat fish, are we?
Well, I don't know. Jesus ate fish after his resurrection, so you never know.
Yeah, my father-in-law reckons there's going to be bacon and egg trees.
Well, that could be. Well, let's face it, they're able to now make bacon and eggs and hamburgers from plants. So yes. If man could do that, imagine what God can do.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be pretty cool, I think. Well, thank you, Dr. John. Another awesome week. And, of course, we still ask everybody, send your questions through to our text line. That is 0401 949 949. We love answering those questions, everything to do with evolution and creation and that sort of thing. Or maybe you've got something that you've seen in the news that you'd like us to talk about, something you think is, pretty exciting when it comes to evolution or creation. We'd love to chat about that as well. So just send it through to the text line, 0401 949 949. Dr. John, thank you so much. Another very interesting week, talking more about how things, de-evolution, de-evolve rather than actually evolve. And very interesting about the fish, I've got to say, that they're now all just growing to a smaller size. I didn't know that.
Yeah, okay, well, the fishermen have got to start throwing back the big ones. We'll talk about the little one that got away.
All righty, well, thank you, Dr. John, and I'm pretty sure we'll either see you next week or maybe, just a slight maybe, one of your mates, Mark from Sydney, might be with us next week. We'll see.
Well, he'll certainly be here in the fairly near future, Mick, so stay tuned, people.
That'll be exciting. You are on 94.9. It is 6 minutes to 9, and we've got a